All right, so wait.
just
You know,
gotta
we gotta
pull
do
it
a couple
start.
things before we do it.
Turn it on.
It's on. Okay. So this is the April 16th meeting of the Council Committee on Operations. Present are council members, Hoey, Anani, and Igo. Staff, Jared Pellerin, Michelle Andre, and we will be considering local law B of 2019 in relation to noticing meetings of a public body. Okay,
Richard, you didn't mention you.
and that, well, I'm the chair, Richard Conti. Okay. So, quickly, what local law B basically does is really put in code current provisions of the open meetings law, but adds an additional provision which requires prior notice of public notice of meetings, time and place, but also adds in a provision that the notice must also include the meeting agenda 7 days in advance of the meeting. Is that correct? That's basically the significant
The gist
change.
of it,
Yeah. So that's what this would do. And you want to say anything, Mr. Hoey?
Yes. One of the impetuses for pushing this forward is there's certain boards that have a tendency of introducing, they give out a meeting, they say there's going to be a meeting, and they put an agenda up, but then they add items, 2 days before the meeting instead of giving a full week's notice. The other thing that I really wanted to look at, and I talked to Jared, and we don't know how to do it in a way that won't affect the whole city, because there are certain areas, the Common Council, for example, will get hit with an MC, something that is so urgent that we gotta pass it. So it's trying to craft something that if you put up, I'll use the planning board as an example. If they put up this is the floor plan for this building, and you look at it and you find problems with it, and then you show up at the meeting and that whole plan is different than what you had studied a week before. That's what I was looking that, in my mind, it's not fair to the people who come to the meetings because they only give you 3 minutes to talk as the public, and sometimes the decisions are made that night. And there might be a serious problem and you didn't have a chance to look at it because it was just posted that day. So that's what I was looking. And
This wouldn't address that. Because the only issue there would be, say it's, 125 Main Street is on the agenda, and when it was put out, the plans that were filed had a certain floor plan for 125 Main Street that was in advance that the public looked at and everything else, and then at the meeting, the developer submits a new floor plan. Well, what was on the agenda was the application for 125 Main Street,
correct.
and so...
But there's no public input, then you're agreeing
Yeah.
that there should be no public input.
No, I'm not agreeing, I'm just saying, I don't
I'm
think
just
this, I'm
saying
just saying
that
this
if-
wouldn't
if we
address
leave
it.
it
I mean,
as
but
it
you
is.
would, there is a provision in the open meetings law that any public document that a public body has must be made available to the public prior to or at the meeting.
Okay.
But
But again, if you've gone up and, say you show up to the
To the
meeting
extent
and you don't have the
practical.
to the
latest.
extent practical, yeah, or posted, but I mean, things like that. There used to be a provision in the zoning code, and I don't know, when we did the USDO, there's a lot of stuff that was lost, that related to the zoning board, remember, because I wrote that part, that was to the effect that any new application materials or documentation that was provided by an applicant at the public meeting that was not previously part or available to the public, that the board would have to make that information available to the public and couldn't take any action that night, something to that effect. Basically said that, you can't just come in and possibly be subject to another public hearing. You just can't come in to a public meeting on an application like that and all of a sudden the developer drops a whole new plan, and the board,
But then there's a fine line between a whole new plan, how much is a lot?
Yeah,
I mean, you go to BZA, and the guys are asking the guy a question, say, about a fence or whatever, and they says, well, would you consider moving it back? And the guy says, yeah, absolutely, because, instead of 3 feet from here, go back 5 feet. And he says, yes, now you're gonna wait a whole other week for something like that, I don't know. I don't know where
It's a tough one.
Yeah,
And if people would play by kind of the guidelines, I hate making tighter guidelines, and that's what, one of the main reason, and with this law right now, and that what we're talking about, and as it's written, is we've had cases where on 5:30 on a Friday night, they said, Monday's meeting, we're going to bring up this thing. So this at least gives us a week to be able to look at it. So maybe this is step one.
Now, I just want to go back and remember, there is a provision already in the code for the planning board, that's section 42-181, which says that a notice and agenda of every planning board meeting shall be provided to the common council at least 1 week prior to any meeting of the planning board.
Okay. Well, I had Brian Shea did talk to the planning board on the incidents I was talking about, where on a Friday night, 5:30,
Yeah.
they posted this is going to be on the agenda, and there really wasn't enough time to react, to get, the public involved, and we're going to see a lot more of these cases.
They did a lot more of that, and I'll tell you that they just, remember the last workshop, not this one, but the one prior to that, the last one, or they were planning to put the USDO amendments on the workshop agenda and then have that public hearing, and found out that it was not on the draft workshop agenda.
Okay, I
And
kind
so,
of remember that.
remember that? And so they did pull it, and it was on, I guess, the workshop agenda last week, maybe, or this, I forget, I guess it was last week, and probably the next public hearing will be coming up on. I don't know if their website is up yet with having the applications available, but they did, based on this, they did pull it back. I just got an email today from planning with the upcoming BZA, HRC, and planning board agendas. I didn't have a chance to look at them, which includes the public hearings they're holding as well. So I'm not sure what was on there, but I didn't have a chance to open them up.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean,
And in fairness, the one like in 563 up there, I know they could have taken it up that night, okay? But there were some things that did come up, concerns, and they laid it over. I'm not sure it was the plan of BZA, but it was for the same piece of property, It was 2 weeks.
I just want to thank the sponsor for introducing this local law. When you look at the role of government, right, we want to make sure that the public are participating and they have adequate time to look through information that the city officials are putting out there, so they could come and make a decision that they are well informed on. So I just want to thank the sponsor, and this is a good public policy, and I'll be supporting it.
Now, are we holding these boards to much higher standards than we impose on ourselves? As far as the
no.
7-day notice?
Well, no, I'll try to-
excluding MCs.
all right. So we obviously our meetings are all our meeting schedule is all published on an annual basis.
Right.
So the meeting schedule is there. The agenda is published in advance of 7 days.
On a Friday, but does it?
Friday.
It goes out there?
It's published and
Public on Friday, too?
yeah, it's public on Friday, basically, or they're Friday, or it's not Friday on Monday. So it's a week in advance, more than a week in advance. And we do the active calendar, which then,
Well, yeah, I mean, it helps as far as this issue.
yeah, well, it addresses this issue because now the complaint in the past was that our agendas had everything that was on the calendar and nobody knew what was happening.
It's like a live calendar.
Right, so with the active calendar, we now, publish in advance to the extent we know it, what's going to be taken up off of that calendar. So that's something we tried to do. In terms of MCs, there are always issues, that come up. That caveat is there. It's provided for in our rules.
Which I think is needed.
Yeah, I don't think this language would preclude that, wouldn't you?
No, what, no.
Yeah.
And the other thing, you just mentioned something, the live calendar, okay? I don't know if when the agenda goes out for that week, it could be marked, it's not attached to the calendar, okay? If the public want to call it up and look at it, but if it's right on the same document, either that attached or,
Yeah,
live
I mean,
start or
it
something.
is
something
put
like
up on the website, so it's right there when you go to the website, you get the agenda right as part of that same attachment or that area,
But-
the
that.
active
But even the
calendar.
people that come in the door and might hear, that they aren't indicated to what.
They have it out
We have-
there in
we
the
put-
chamber.
We make it
In the
available.
chamber, yeah, they made a copy.
Wouldn't it be easier for you just to attach it to, or just,
Because it also changes. It can change, so the initial one is our best estimate, and there are some caveats
from
of what, so if there's something that's in
From caucus
committee.
to-
From caucus, so if there's something in committee that's coming up prior
Yeah, you're
to,
right, you're right.
we put that on the active
Yeah.
calendar with a caveat that it's dependent on,
okay,
or something like that. So it's something that
fine.
does,
Like,
it's simpler to make that change in that one piece of paper than going back and marking up the full agenda at the time. Just like the legislature.
Yeah, that's
what they do.
It's on a website and it's
Yeah.
also on the Facebook, so.
Yeah, we put it up, so it's available. I just want to note that Councilmember Doche is also here. So Judy, we were discussing this proposal. The only operable change here is putting in that, I mean, this is really out of open meetings law. The only operable change is the part that says the notice has to include the meeting agenda.
Uh-huh.
So that's the operable change that we're talking about.
And two, the reasoning behind this, just to let you know, was there was a planning board meeting announced Friday at 5:30 for the following week. I think it was Monday or Tuesday, the following week. And it was like kind of snuck in, and we felt we didn't have enough time to prepare. It was the weekend, I couldn't call people that were involved, and the citizens who wanted to talk about what was going on.
There are significant issues being discussed at some of these meetings that people really need to be able to have some time to digest it. What's the point of public comment if you can't review in advance, especially the changes?
And that's one of the things I brought up. What I really wanted to see where, if there's a major change, and this has happened at the planning board, where the developer comes in with a whole new set of plans, you're there, you've already testified, and they say, well, you're using the wrong plans. These are our latest plans. And that's happened, and we don't know legally how to deal with that. I mean, I brought it up, I talked to Jared, talked to Richard, and Maluso, and...
You know what I do, because I'm sure that we had language in the old zoning ordinance, which I saved before I tossed everything. I'm going to go back and find it, because I know there was language that was put in the old, it was related to the BZA probably, because that's where all the action used to be, that basically said something to the effect, when new documents are provided by an applicant at a board meeting that weren't part of the original application, that they have to be made available to the public, or if they're submitted prior to, they have to be made available in advance, something like along those lines. So let me find that language, because that might address some of the issues that you're talking about.
You know, here's an interesting maybe workaround this issue. You don't necessarily, sometimes documents are being presented, and including us, sometimes we're, significantly changing legislation or something like that at a meeting. I'm wondering if what we want to do is say something to the effect, you can't act on an application or an issue.
I think that's what the language I'm thinking about that was discontinued when we did the USDO.
Yeah, so it's not like you can't talk about it at a meeting
vote
because,
on it. Right.
because then it's up for people to see it,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, and maybe some people can, make some public comments on it, but allow people to have some time to digest it and prohibit them from acting on it at that meeting if there's been significant or substantial changes, and then we can debate.
But I just don't know how you set the threshold and who's going to enforce that. So that's where it comes back
The
to.
bottom line, if the planning
A
board
good
says...
lawyer could draft some good language.
Yeah,
Basically, the planning board said to us, well, you can come in and comment all you want. Basically, it doesn't matter, and that's what we're finding out, so.
I think
Right?
enforcement.
And
yeah,
they're not
would
ashamed to
definitely
say
be
that either.
challenging.
Like,
It's on tape somewhere.
That's what, what's his name
They
said
say it
at the
publicly.
meeting, and I couldn't believe it. I don't know. What's the guy's
still
name?
with the
again?
planning board.
Al.
Al DeSanto.
So, you know, in the case of planning board, things where there is a change in the height, number of stories, number of apartments, square footage, that would be a substantial change, I think.
Do we have to put that language in?
I think it's helpful we could do something, for example,
Yes.
for planning applications, BZA applications, if there's a change in the square footage or the size, size of the building, et cetera, that,
Then you look at another board, how do you do that for something like historic planning or whatever? I mean, I wouldn't know how to write that language.
Preservation.
Preservation, yeah.
well, okay, so we can pick on BZA and planning board with regard to specific issues. And say, for example, for the planning board and BZA.
Because typically they're the
this
ones
would
that have a major
constitute
impact.
What?
They're the ones that typically have a major impact on public comment or the public not having enough time to review documents.
Right.
I
So,
didn't
you know, in
think
the
BZA
case
was
of the
gonna
New
have that
Scotland
back
project,
and forth.
they're in the process of changing the number of stories of each one of the buildings and, from what was, proposed, and potentially increasing the number of apartments again. And that particular development right now seems to me as though in that small amount of space is going to exceed the number of apartments that are at Weiss Road.
I'll say this, I give them a lot of credit. They go everywhere in the
But
city.
I had a discussion with him today, he says the point is to get density. I said, not density, so, he says, because people want to be walkable. People want to walk to where they work across the street. And I didn't want to get into the whole issue of how many people he really thought that work in St. Peter's were going to move into these apartments. And their mind's made up, I'm
Okay,
telling
so
you.
I have to say, so people keep on using this density as though that's all our planning goals are. And this is driving me a little bit
That's-
batty.
yeah.
Because if you look at our USDO, it talks about, supporting and, protecting, preserving
Protecting
our
neighborhoods.
neighborhoods, our
Exactly.
Janet Stutzman hit on the head the
It
other night.
doesn't say anything about increasing the density. That is, if that's what we're going to condense it down to, then let's rewrite the code and get us to pass that. But we're not passing that. So that's A. B, I've started looking into the 2030 plan to see where density is the end-all be-all in our comprehensive plan. And I'm having some difficulty finding that. I've certainly found a lot of other stuff that sort of supports the position taken by residents in neighborhoods.
It talks about, the comp plan does talk about walkable neighborhoods and walkable communities. That leads right into, you create walkable communities through density.
What about
I'm
walkable
sorry,
communities
my
with sidewalks?
neighborhood
It's
is
walkable now.
very walkable.
Okay.
It might not be after this one, I don't know.
We need sidewalks, right? So we don't need density.
Anyway, I think we're
All right,
we're-
so what do we want
Want to
to
make a
Right,
motion to,
We like our walkable neighborhood.
well, we have public comment.
public comment?
All right,
Public
Yeah.
comment?
I'll open for public comment. Alana Klein. On the local law.
Good evening, everyone. I think the conversation, I won't say got off the rails, but kind of got sidetracked there. And I'm also not going to say or pretend that I'm an expert or as knowledgeable as you all on specific language to put in the law or anything like that. Overall, I think it's a common sense resolution. As people are saying, Councilman Hoey and Anane, the public deserves to know what's being talked about because it will overall, whether it's planning board, whether it's the the water department, which I don't know if that will be affected, whether it's the common council, it will affect your life at some point or another, or it will affect your neighbor. So I think it's a common sense resolution overall. Maybe some details or specifics need to be involved or need to be updated, but I do like it overall. People like Mr. Simpson, who's here tonight, myself, Charles Hobart Robinson, Marlon Anderson, Keith Irish, Vincent Ragusa, we go to these meetings all the time. We probably check the agendas a couple times a week, but there's people that come to meetings, it's their first meeting, they're not sure when the meeting is, where it is, what's on the agenda, and plus, what's on the agenda for committee meetings has already been updated, so I think putting it actually into the language of the law to make sure that continues it is a good step. And another story of what happened to me personally, going to not knowing when meetings are. Some of you may remember my first meeting was in July 3rd, 2017. And I came just to observe. I didn't give public comments or anything like that. The next meeting I went to, I gave public comments. That was July 17th. And I had this impression that they were every other week. Well, this is kind of on me, but funny story, the next quote-unquote meeting I attended was July 31st, 2017. I walked up to City Hall, pulled on the door, nothing happened. So, again, it might have been on me at the time, but I was unaware that it was the first and third Mondays instead of every other Monday. So, anything we can do to increase public awareness. And I think this is very similar, Mr. Hoey, to Local Law A, which passed, I believe, unanimously. So I'm fully in support of this, and I hope it passes tonight 5-0, and then presumably next council meeting 15-0. Also, just quick, majority consent, I totally understand the purpose of that. I've talked to a couple of you about this. I think when a resolution or ordinance is deemed for majority consent, just have a paper copy out on the counter at the meeting or post it online as soon as you know about it, so that even if it is only 3 days or 2 days or 1 day or an hour, people have access to that rather than having access 5 minutes before they're scheduled to speak at the council meeting. So I hope it passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's just thinking about majority consent again. If an ordinance is added to an agenda by majority consent, it's not, unless there's unanimous consent, it cannot be acted on that night. So I think that's a safeguard there. The majority consent, for the most part, are really more like non-controversial type resolutions.
Right, that's for the regular meeting. What about, we've had emergency meetings sometimes.
Which have to be noticed in advance.
But it's a different time.
There's a different, I mean, in terms of notices in the open meetings law, it's not a 7-day notice.
No, and this is what
That's the second part of here,
second
yeah.
bullet refers to. So if the meeting, because we know when all of our common council meetings are, technically a year in advance.
Right.
So you already know 7 days ahead that that's when that meeting is. The agenda needs to be published. If you have such thing as an emergency meeting, you have to make every reasonable effort to get the agenda and the time out as soon as possible.
So that's covered by the extent practicable?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the current, again, because this governs us right now under open meetings law, so that's what
And the other thing we're required by what, local, for executive sessions.
Yeah.
open meetings law, which is not here, but, I have the open meetings law here if you
No,
want.
okay, so we're covered
like
with
to
that, and we know how to handle that when we have to go into
Yeah.
executive session then, okay.
I'd like to make a motion to move it out of committee on a favorable recommendation.
Well,
Well, before, go ahead.
so I'm a little bit confused about the wording of this, because the first subdivision says if a meeting is scheduled at least 1 week prior to it, notice shall be given electronically in Princeton news media and posted conspicuously. It says nothing about the agenda.
And the meeting agenda of a meeting scheduled at least 1 week prior thereto.
It's it's really,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, so it's section 104
I'm sorry.
of the open meetings law. It's the same language, except by, and that first one, adding the inclusion of the meeting agenda. I think that's the only difference you have, right? I got the open meetings law here if you want it.
So Richard, you were saying that you had some old BZA language.
Yeah, but that, wouldn't be relevant here, but I'm pretty sure, because I recall, because this issue used to bother me in the past, I think it was maybe in 2010 or something, that, you would go to a BZA hearing, and then the applicant, developer would come in with new plans, whatever, that weren't always available, that the board would take, and then they act on it. I'm pretty sure that there was some language that was added in, that I think I added in, sponsored, that tried to deal with that. So I'm going to go back, and I have hard copy of the old zoning ordinance.
So my question was, did you want to amend this? or-
I don't think it belongs in, so the question is,
Can we amend it with the USDO?
well, you see, the problem is, I'd like to look at it and see, I like this generic stuff, because if you, amending the USDO is so complicated right now. So the good thing about this is it's more generic.
Now, can we visit, I hope that we can, when we get that language, maybe we can, in the future, look at that language and maybe
Yeah.
incorporating it.
So,
And I just wonder also if you're looking at an amendment to the USDO, if
well,
that makes more sense because these are the areas you're trying to target versus putting this in the citywide code, which affects every single board.
yeah, so this, I would
public
move,
meeting across the
I would
city.
move this one out, and then look at that other language and see if it's something
Sure.
that we need to do in the USDO, or we need to do someplace else.
When we get the amendments
So,
to USDO,
I
we
would
might,
like to ask us to ask, essentially task Jared with looking at the current notice requirements in the USDO for the planning board and the Board of Zoning Appeals with regard to that kind of issue and what's in there. And then there's a part of me that feels like some of this language might be in there, but it's not being followed.
It could be, because,
I just started looking at trying to bring up the USDO, but of course it's, it's a 300-page document, so finding that stuff in it.
it is possible it might be there, because I remember there were some of these issues, and I think you and I were discussing with Chris back then about some stuff we were trying to get back in, and I think it was some of the provisions on conditional use permits that we were trying to carry over from the old ordinance on special use permits. I don't know if this was there or not, but there were some provisions. Same thing with the nuisance provisions, which I don't know, what they did with them, I'm not sure what they did with them.
I mean, and just going back to local law A, where they weren't taking minutes for 5 years. I mean, it's on the books, they're supposed to do this, and we're just, all we're trying to do is
Not
kind of
only
push.
minutes, but they're not recording this stuff like they're required to.
Well, they were now, because I had asked for the recording of a workshop, and Brad said it's a workshop, and so we don't record those, and then I said, it's a meeting of the public body, you have to. He said, okay, and so I believe now that they are doing the workshop recordings.
Well, we gotta keep our
Well,
eyes
I
on
got a copy of a BZA meeting recording that is inaudible.
Well, that's part of the problem is sometimes,
But that was here, so hopefully that's...
was it, yeah. I don't know what they use. This recorder, I listened to some of these and they seem to be pretty good.
So can I make a motion?
Yeah, make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to move this out of committee on a favorable recommendation.
Is there a
Second.
second? So,
Who's second?
Tom.
motion by Mr.
Are you on
Anani,
this?
second by Mr. Hoey. Is there any then further discussion?
Am I on this? I'm on this.
Yeah, you're on the
Yeah.
committee. Any further discussion?
aye.
None?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is adopted. And we did public comment? Yeah. Any other business? If not, we'll adjourn.
Oh, yeah. Oh, let's talk